The house was quiet. The night Evelyn found it. Thomas was in Columbus for a teachers' conference. Wow, 3 days away, he had said, and she had finally decided to do the thing she had been putting off for 2 years. The hall closet. It sounds like such a small thing, cleaning out a closet. But when you have been avoiding it since before your wedding day, when every time you reach for your coat, you feel the weight of the box sitting on the top shelf that you have never once opened, it stops being. It stops being a small thing and becomes something you carry. So, that Wednesday evening in January, with the heat on and the dishes done, and no reason left to delay, Evelyn pulled a kitchen chair into the hallway, climbed up, and brought the box down. It was marked, in Thomas's handwriting, with a single letter, the letter D. She had always assumed it stood for donations. She had never asked. Inside, a stack of old grade books, rubber-banded together, a watch with a cracked face, a birthday card she did not recognize, a photograph of Sylvia, just Sylvia, alone, laughing at something out of frame, taken somewhere she could not place. And beneath all of it, pressed against the bottom corner of the box, a small leather journal, dark brown, the leather soft with age, a plain elastic band holding it shut. She did not recognize it. Thomas had never mentioned keeping a journal. She held it for a moment, turned it over. No name on the cover, no year. She looked at the photograph of Sylvia again. Sylvia laughing. Sylvia alive. Sylvia, who had been gone for almost 3 years now, and then she opened the journal. The first line read, "I have loved 2 women at the same time. I am not proud of it. But I will write the truth here, because the truth has to live somewhere." Evelyn closed the journal. She set it down on the hallway floor. She sat next to it for several minutes without moving. Then she picked it up and began to read. This is not a story about betrayal. At least it is not only that. It is a story about how love works between people who stay, who choose, again and again, to remain in the room with each other, even when the room gets very dark. It is a story about a woman named Sylvia, who saw something that no one else could see, and who spent the last years of her life quietly making space for it. And it is a story about what happens when the truth you were not meant to find turns out to be the only thing that could have set you free. Let us go back to the beginning. Before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to InnerTell Studio. We tell true stories about love, grief, and the complicated choices real people make. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. It only takes a second, and it means the world to us. Evelyn met Sylvia in the fall of 1991 at a nursing program in Cincinnati, Ohio. They were assigned to the same clinical rotation on the first day, and Sylvia borrowed Evelyn's pen to write down the supervisor's name and never gave it back. That is how Evelyn always told the story. That is the detail she never left out, no matter how many times she told it. They were not an obvious pair. Sylvia was loud in the best possible way. The kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who sent handwritten cards, who laughed from somewhere deep and real, was careful and quiet. The kind of person who noticed things others missed. Together, they made a whole that neither of them could have managed separately. For 27 years, they were the kind of friends that most people spend their whole lives looking for and never find. They talked every other day. They took 1 trip a year together, allsies, somewhere neither of them had been. When Evelyn's first marriage ended in 2003, Sylvia drove 4 hours on a Thursday night to sit on her couch and say nothing useful and stay until the morning. That was all Evelyn needed. That was exactly what Sylvia knew how to give. Evelyn noticed Sylvia's marriage the way you notice a familiar piece of music playing in another room. She knew the sound of it without being inside. Sylvia and Thomas had met in graduate school in Columbus in 1997, married a year later. Evelyn was the maid of honor. She was the one who sat with Sylvia on the floor of the dressing room for 20 minutes while Sylvia breathed through something that was not quite panic but was close to it. Evelyn had held her hands and said, "You already know. You already know this is right." And Sylvia had nodded and stood up and walked out and married him. Thomas was a good man. Evelyn had always believed that. He was reserved in the way that some men who spend their days talking to teenagers become reserved, as though he had used up his words by 3:00 and had very few left for the evening. He loved Sylvia. She had never doubted it, but she had, over the years, noticed things she did not say out loud. Attention sometimes. A way he looked at the middle distance when he thought no one was watching. A quietness in him that went deeper than personality. She did not say any of this to Sylvia. It was not her place, and besides, she told herself, she did not fully understand what she was noticing. She was just close enough to see the edges of a thing she could not name. In 2016, Sylvia was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 3. She called Thomas first. He was at school. She waited until his last class. And then she called Evelyn. Evelyn was in her car when the phone rang. She sat in the parking lot and listened, and when the call ended, she drove directly to Sylvia's house without going home first. She did not leave for the next 3 years. Not entirely. She had her own apartment, her own job, her own daughter Renee to think about, but she was there every week, sometimes twice a week. And for the last 4 months, she was there almost every day. She learned Sylvia's medication schedule better than Thomas did. She learned which nurses Sylvia liked and which ones she would rather not see. She was there at the end. Thomas was on one side, Evelyn was on the other, and Sylvia looked at both of them and did not look afraid. Evelyn had spent her whole adult life being the person Sylvia could count. She had never once stopped to ask herself what that meant for her own life. How much of herself had been organized around this one friendship, this one person, this one love that did not have a category. She did not ask, not until she found the journal. Sylvia died on a Tuesday morning in March 2019. Evelyn was holding her hand. The funeral was 6 days later. Evelyn stood beside Thomas for 4 hours in a reception line, accepting condolences from people neither of them particularly wanted to see. They spoke to each other in the language of logistics. Called the florist? The casserole is in the refrigerator. Did you sleep last night? These were the sentences they had for each other. In those first weeks, practical, necessary, contained. For 6 months after the funeral, they were careful around each other, in the way that people are careful around grief, giving it room, not pressing too close, not wanting to make anything worse. Evelyn visited the house to drop things off. She brought food. She sat with Thomas when he seemed to need it, and left when he seemed to need that instead. She was doing what Sylvia would have done. She was doing what she had always done. Then she started coming on Sunday evenings. Not planned, not arranged. She would find herself driving in that direction and think, I should check on him. It's started with dinner. She would cook, they would eat, she would go home. Then the dinners got longer. Then the conversations started going past the dishes, and past the table, and past the reasonable hour, when it should leave. They talked about Sylvia every single time. For months, that was all they talked about. And it turns out that loving the same person, mourning the same person, can become the deepest kind of intimacy. The kind that forms in the dark, the kind neither party sees coming until it has already arrived. The shift, when it happened slowly, and then all at once, the way these things always do. It was a Sunday night in November 2019. Thomas asked if she wanted to stay for the rest of the evening. Instead of taking her coat, she stayed. They talked until past midnight. When she finally left, sitting in her car at the end of his driveway, she sat for a long time before she turned the key. She told no one what she was feeling, not even Renee, especially not Renee. Thomas called Gerald, his older brother, on a Sunday in February 2020, and told him what was happening. Gerald listened carefully and then said, very carefully, I hope you both know what you are doing. That was all he said. It was enough to say. They dated quietly, carefully, for 8 months. They did not post anything. They did not announce anything. When they finally told Renee, she went very quiet, in a way that was different from upset. It was the quiet of someone who has seen something coming and spent a long time pretending they had not. They married in the spring of 2021 in a small ceremony with 14 people in attendance. A judge. Some flowers, Thomas's side and Evelyn's side, separated by a folding table with lemonade. It was not glamorous. It was real. Renee was not there. People had opinions. People always do. They said it was too soon. They said it was wrong. They said Sylvia was barely cold. Though by then, it had been 2 years. And Sylvia herself would have had something very sharp to say about anyone who used that phrase. What nobody knew, what nobody could have known, was that Sylvia had not merely predicted this. She had quietly, deliberately, made room for it. But we will get to that. The journal spanned 9 years, from 2009 to 2018. Not a daily journal. Thomas was not that kind of man. He wrote only when something had to be said somewhere. When the pressure of an unspoken thing became too great to carry quietly. There were 41 entries in total. Evelyn read all of them that night. The first entry was dated March of 2009. Evelyn and Sylvia had been friends for 18 years by then. Thomas had been married to Sylvia for 11. The entry was short, barely half a page. It read, "Something has been happening that I do not have a name for. When Evelyn is in the house, I feel a kind of clarity I do not feel otherwise. I am not going to act on this. I am writing it down so I can see how small it is. I am ashamed of it. Sylvia deserves better than my confusion." Evelyn sat with that for a long time. The second entry, from 2011, described a Sunday afternoon when Sylvia had gone to visit her sister and Thomas, and Evelyn had sat on the back porch for 3 hours. talking about nothing important, and how afterward Thomas had driven to a gas station and sat in the parking lot for 45 minutes because, yes, he did not know what else to do with himself. And then the third entry, 2012. This one was longer. He had told Sylvia, not everything, not the full weight of it, but enough. He had sat her down one evening in the summer of 2012 and told her that he was struggling with something he was not proud of, that he was confused in a way he could not fully explain, that he needed her to know because he could not keep it from her any longer. The journal recorded what Sylvia said. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I know, Thomas, I have known for a while. We are going to be all right. And Thomas had written this in a slightly different hand, as though his grip had changed while he wrote it. She said, she does not know. She would never let herself know. That is who she is. Evelyn read that sentence 3 times. Sylvia had known. Sylvia had known for years, and she had chosen, deliberately, consciously, not to say anything, not to address it, not to make it into something it did not need to be. She had absorbed it and continued, and made peace with a truth that most people would have found intolerable, because Sylvia understood something about love that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid, that it is not always tidy, that it does not always sort itself into the categories we build for it, and that the people who matter to you are large enough to contain things that do not have names. There was a 4th entry. From 2015, Thomas had written, Sylvia told me something tonight that I have been thinking about ever since. She said she worries that Evelyn loves her too much, too completely, to ever be fully happy on her own, she said. She has been trying to think of a way to fix that. I asked her what she meant. She said she did not know yet, but that she was working on it. Evelyn closed the journal for the second time that night. She stood up. She walked to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water and drank all of it. Then she went back to the hallway and picked up the journal and kept reading. There were more entries through 2016, 2017. Fewer, as Sylvia got sicker, as the weight of illness took up more of the space in their lives. Thomas wrote about Evelyn being there, about watching her sit with Sylvia, about the particular quality of that love. Steady, undemanding, fully present. He wrote, I understand now why Sylvia was never threatened. It is because what Evelyn feels for her is completely whole. There is nothing missing in it, and Sylvia feels the same way back. And then the 5th entry, the one that everything had been building toward, dated July 2018, 6 months before Sylvia died. Thomas had written, Sylvia called me into the bedroom tonight. She was sitting up. She seemed very alert. More alert than she has been in weeks. She said she needed to tell me something, and she needed me to really hear it. She said, when I am gone, do not shut Evelyn out. Do not let her disappear from your life out of some idea that it is more respectful or more appropriate. She needs you as much as you need her. I am not telling you to replace me. I am not telling you to do anything you would not do on your own. I am telling you not to waste each other. I am telling you that I have thought about this for a long time, and I am at peace with it. And I need you to be at peace with it too. Thomas had written beneath that, I did not know what to say, so I said, are you sure? And she said, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Evelyn sat on the floor of her hallway with that journal in her lap for 2 hours. Sylvia had known. Sylvia had arranged it. The last request, "Take care of Evelyn," had not been about friendship. It had not been the ordinary ask of a dying woman hoping her husband would check in on her best friend. It had been a release, a permission, a final act of love from a woman who had always been the most generous person in every room she entered, and the most perceptive. Renee was 27 when her mother married Thomas. She is 29 now. She teaches 4th grade 40 minutes away and visits rarely, a fact that has caused Evelyn a quiet, chronic grief that she has never fully said out loud. Renee had not opposed the marriage because she thought it was wrong in any simple sense. She is not that kind of person. She had opposed it because she was terrified of something she could not quite articulate, a fear that her mother was going to disappear into this grief and then into this man, and that she would lose her once to the loss of Sylvia, and then to a life that no longer had room for a daughter, who was not quite certain where she fit. She had been carrying that fear alone. She had not said it to her mother. She had not said it to anyone. And then, 3 weeks before Evelyn found the journal, Renee had found it first. She had been at the house, helping her mother clear boxes from the guest room, a project they had started together, and then abandoned, the way mother and daughter projects sometimes do. She was carrying a box to the closet when she saw the other box on the top shelf, the one marked D, and she pulled it down because she thought it might belong in the guest room too. She opened it. She saw the journal. She did what anyone would do. She read it. She read all of it. Standing in the hallway, then sitting on the floor, then sitting in the car in the driveway, for an hour, she sat there and thought about what she had read, and tried to decide what it meant and what, if anything, she was supposed to do about it. She decided not to tell her mother. It was not a clean decision. She knew that. She told herself her mother deserved to find it on her own terms, or not at all. She told herself that reading someone's private journal and then reporting its contents was not the same as doing something good. She told herself a lot of things. Some of them were even true. But the thing that changed for Renee, the thing she had not expected, was what the journal did to her feelings about Sylvia. She had grown up with Sylvia in her life. Sylvia had been to every school play. Sylvia had sent birthday cards with actual handwritten letters inside. Sylvia had sat with her through a bad breakup at 22 and said, without any preamble, he was not the one. No, Renee had loved Sylvia. But she had also, somewhere in the back of her mind, half blamed Sylvia for how much of her mother's emotional life lived outside their own relationship. The journal changed that. Sylvia had seen loneliness, the specific, particular loneliness of a woman who gives everything to everyone and quietly starves in the gap, and she had spent years quietly trying to answer it. She had absorbed a complicated truth about her own marriage, and she had not used it as a weapon, and she had not run from it. She had looked at it clearly and made a decision rooted entirely in love, not in competition, not in martyrdom, in love. That was not a woman to blame. That was a woman to be in awe of. Renee put the journal back in the box. She put the box back on the shelf. She drove home and did not call her mother that week, which was not unusual, and tried to figure out how to carry what she now knew. She was still carrying it 3 weeks later when Evelyn called. There was one more entry. The last page of the journal. Evelyn had been reading for 2 hours by the time she reached it, and she almost missed it. The handwriting was smaller than the rest, pressed close to the bottom of the page, as though Thomas had run out of room and did not want to start a new page for something this private. It was dated 2 weeks before Sylvia died. It read, "I have been thinking tonight about what I will lose when this is over. Not in a selfish way. I hope in an honest way. I will lose the sound of her laugh. The way she makes coffee wrong and does not believe anyone who tells her. The way she has always been entirely effortlessly herself. In a way, I never quite managed. I thought for a long time that Sylvia was the great love of my life. She was. She is. But I have been sitting here tonight, and I keep thinking the real love of my life might have been Evelyn. Not in the way people would assume, not in the way that replaces anything, in the way that stays, in the way that knows everything and stays anyway. I hope they find each other. I think they already have. I think they have for years. They have for years, and neither of them would ever have allowed themselves to say so. Evelyn did not move for a very long time. Outside, the January trees were bare. The heat ran. A car passed on the street. The lamp on the floor cast a long shadow of her. Across the hallway wall, she sat in that shadow and held the journal and thought about Sylvia. Sylvia laughing. Sylvia driving 4 hours on a Thursday night. Sylvia saying, "I know. I have known for a while." And she thought, she left this for me to find. She did not hide it well enough to keep it hidden. She knew that eventually the box, marked D, would come down from the shelf and someone would open it. She did not know if Sylvia had planned it that precisely. But she knew Sylvia, and Sylvia did not do things by accident. She picked up her phone. She did not call Thomas. She called Renee. Renee answered on the first ring. There was a long pause before Evelyn said anything. And then she said, "I found something tonight. I think you should know about it." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Renee said, "I know, Mom. I read it too." Evelyn exhaled. It was the sound of a person who has been holding their breath for longer than they realized. They talked for 3 hours. It was the longest conversation they had had since before the wedding. They talked about Sylvia, and about Thomas, and about what Renee had been afraid of and had not been able to say. They talked about the particular loneliness that Renee had watched in her mother for years, the loneliness of a woman who pours herself out for everyone around her and never demands anything back. They talked until past 2 in the morning, when Renee finally said, "I should have come to the wedding." And Evelyn said, "I know. I know." And neither of them said anything for a while after that. Sylvia had not just left them a love story. She had left them a way back to each other.
Thomas came home 2 days later. It was a Friday morning. He came through the door with his bag and his coat and his slightly tired expression from 3 days of hotel beds and conference room chairs. And he stopped when he saw the journal on the kitchen table. He set his bag down slowly. He sat down. Evelyn was already at the table. She had made coffee. She had not slept much. She was wearing the grey cardigan she had been wearing the night she found it. She said, "I was clearing the hall closet." He nodded. She asked him why he kept it. He was quiet for a moment. Not a defensive quiet, but a thoughtful one, the kind of quiet a man who has been a history teacher for 20 years uses when he's about to say something true. He said, "It was the most honest thing I have ever written. I did not know how to throw away something that true." She asked him if he had ever planned to tell her. He said he did not know. He said there were times he had almost said something and then decided the timing was wrong, or she was not ready, or he was not ready, and that the months had turned into years and the journal had stayed in the box. Then he said, "I was afraid you would think I had used Sylvia as a reason to love you, that I had waited for her to be gone so I could have something I had wanted before." Evelyn looked at him across the table. She said, "Did you?" He said, "No. I did not understand what I was feeling until Sylvia explained it to me, and even after she did, I did not act on it. I just tried to do what she asked." Evelyn told him about the last entry. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I did not know she had written anything. I thought the last entry was mine." He read the last page. He said very quietly, "She always saw further than either of us." Evelyn said, "Yes." They sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The coffee went cold. The morning light moved across the floor the way it does in January, pale and brief, and they sat in it together the way that married people do when they are past performance and into something real. Some marriages are built slowly, deliberately through careful choices and shared years. Some are arranged by people who love you well enough to see past what you cannot yet see yourself. Thomas and Evelyn had been both. Evelyn asked Thomas if she could keep the journal. He said, "It was always yours to keep." She put it on the bookshelf in the living room, not hidden, just present, next to a photograph of Sylvia laughing at something out of frame. She put them next to each other, the journal and the laughing woman. It felt like the right arrangement. 3 weeks later, Evelyn called Renee on a Thursday and asked if she wanted to come for dinner on Sunday. Renee said yes, without pausing. She arrived with flowers, tulips, which had been Sylvia's favourite, and handed them to Thomas at the door, without making a thing of it. Thomas thanked her and put them in the blue vase on the counter, which is where Sylvia had always put flowers, and nobody said anything about that, but everyone noticed. Dinner lasted 4 hours. They talked about Sylvia. They talked about the journal. Evelyn said she always knew how to fix things. She just did it quietly, so you did not notice until it was already fixed. Then Renee laughed, one of those laughs that comes out suddenly from somewhere real, and said, "That sounds exactly like her." And it did, and they all knew it. 3 months later, Evelyn sat down at the desk in the spare bedroom and wrote a letter. She knew she could not send it. She wrote it anyway. She wrote it to Sylvia. At the end she wrote, "I understand now what you were doing. All those years. I spent 27 years being the person you could count on. I did not know until now that you spent them being the person I would someday need. I want you to know that it worked. It all worked. Thank you for seeing further than I could. Thank you for staying anyway. Thank you for making room." She sealed the envelope, addressed it, Sylvia's name and nothing else, and put it in the drawer where she keeps the things that matter most. Grief is not a straight line. Love is not a betrayal. And sometimes the most generous thing a person can do is to see the future clearly and make room for it, even knowing they will not be there to see it arrive. Sylvia had done that, quietly, over years, without making a production of it, without asking for credit. She married her dead best friend's husband. Then she found his journal, and in it she found her best friend one last time. She found Sylvia saying, "I know, I have always known, go," Before you go, I want to hear from you. Do you think what Sylvia did was an act of love, or was it too controlling, too carefully arranged for a future she was not supposed to plan? Could you have done what she did? And could you have married your best friend's husband even years later, even with permission? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, please share it, because the right person needs to hear it today. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next one.